Welcome to Freethought Matters. I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor.
And I'm Dan Barker. We're co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which brings you this weekly talk show.
Today we're going to be talking about the right to abortion, the fallout from the Dobbs decision, with author, atheist, and Nation columnist Katha Pollitt.
The Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces Freethought Matters, is the nation's largest association of free thinkers. That's atheists, agnostics, and other non-believers. We invite you to join us in our vital work to keep our secular government free from religious influence. Become a member at FFRF.org or ask for a complimentary copy of our newspaper, Freethought Today. Freedom depends on freethinkers. Watch prior episodes of Freethought Matters on FFRF's YouTube channel.
Today's guest is one of our favorite commentators, Katha Pollitt. Katha's been writing the award-winning column Subject to Debate for The Nation magazine since 1995. She's author of many books, including Reasonable Creatures, Learning to Drive, and most relevant to today's interview, Pro, Reclaiming Abortion Rights. Besides being a feminist, Katha Pollitt is an atheist who has done much to move society forward and has therefore received FFRF's Forward Award.
Every year, Katha comes up with a December gift-giving guide naming nonprofits, and in December 2022, she included the Freedom from Religion Foundation on that list. And we just want to brag a little bit by repeating what Katha wrote. She wrote, with 6 out of 9 Supreme Court justices being right-wing Christians, there's no time like the present to stand up for the separation of church and state. The FFRF fights the good fight with lawsuits and public campaigns and, okay, some jokes and snark too. Full disclosure, I'm on the honorary board. Join us. So, Katha, thank you so much for that plug, and welcome back to Freethought Matters.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, we've not talked to you since the Supreme Court handed down that disastrous Dobbs decision last June, overturning the constitutional right to abortion. So we want to talk about that, but first, you were just on Comedy Central's Daily Show with the guest host, Wanda Sykes. Let's look at a quick clip of what got you some big rounds of applause from that live audience.
Dobbs, which overthrew Roe, has woken up pro-choicers in the most and women who maybe didn't know they were pro-choice in the most amazing way. It was very important in the last election, in several races.
And abortion rights won in those elections.
Yes, it did. And
so we're going to join in that applause, Katha. I just want to ask you, is that very nerve-wracking to go on national live TV?
yes, it was. They did make it incredibly painless. I mean, Wanda Sykes is such a goddess, and she was so friendly and calm, and I knew pretty much what they were going to ask, so that all made a difference.
And you had a supportive audience.
I had a supportive audience, and I let them do my hair and makeup however they wanted.
And you have a supportive audience now. So you wrote a book in 2014 called Pro about abortion, warning that although most Americans are pro-choice, they needed to shed their complacency and get active. And boy, were you ever right. So I noticed on the Daily Show interview that you speculate that some of the public officials who may have voted anti-abortion might really now have thought that Roe couldn't have been overturned. They might have second thoughts. Do you think there were politicians who were simply posturing?
Oh, sure. I think a lot of politicians don't care one way or the other about abortion or many other things that they have to pretend to really care about. So sure. And I think that when Roe was there, it was safe to vote for, to vote in the legislature for all kinds of anti-choice things because you knew they wouldn't actually be upheld. It was just a vote to say, hey, anti-choice people, I'm on your side. But now those votes really matter. And so I think that we might see that some people back off. On the other hand, we might not see that because the stakes have just been raised higher, but the sides haven't changed really. So as state legislatures get more and more worked up about this, some state legislatures, we may see that just more and more crazy laws get passed.
Well, regardless of their ideology, they have to know that society is on our side on this. They see the polls, they see how people are showing up to vote. So maybe some of them will be having politically some second thoughts.
Talking about crazy laws, Republicans, and this is at the federal level, want to create a federal anti-abortion website that would direct women to crisis pregnancy centers and would also collect their personal information and would give that information to anti-abortion groups. This is called the Standing with Moms Act. So I don't know how far it'll get. The Republicans do control the House now, but then there is the Senate.
And Biden to veto.
And Biden's veto. But still, that kind of shows you that a lot of Republicans are prepared to push. And then, okay, here's one. And I should say I get my information from Jessica Valenti, who has a website called Abortion Every Day. And every day she updates it and she sends out an email if you subscribe, which I do. And it's very, very comprehensive. And I learned something every day, usually something I'd rather not, I wish wasn't happening. So in Arkansas, get this, the Republicans want to pass a new bill that would allow women to be prosecuted for, quote, the death of an unborn child. I'm virtually quoting from Jessica here. She should get all the credit. They're not just trying to criminalize abortion, which is already illegal in the state, but any, quote, death that is, quote, caused by a wrongful act, death, or neglect or default. So that means if you have a miscarriage, you could be arrested if the state determines you did something to cause your pregnancy to end. So what does that mean? I mean, women are already being arrested, and some are in jail for using illegal drugs during pregnancy that results in a loss of the pregnancy. When they specify an accidental miscarriage, which they do, that means they're suggesting there are miscarriages that aren't accidental. And this would enshrine the idea that it's murder to cause a miscarriage or stillbirth. Well, we don't want that. I mean, that would mean, that's like what they have in El Salvador.
Yeah.
If you have a miscarriage and they think you've had an abortion, there are women in prison for decades for that.
I mean, aren't the statistics that almost half of all pregnancies end in miscarriage before you even know you're pregnant, kind of thing? I mean, it's very common. Am I wrong?
Miscarriage is I think it's somewhere between 15 and 20%. But the point is that this just opens the door to saying, oh, you caused your miscarriage, so we're going to arrest you. But the cause of most miscarriages is not known in the first place. And, what if you do? If you have a glass of wine and you have a miscarriage, I mean, it doesn't have to even be scientifically accurate. It's what they think is accurate. And we know they think that taking the they think taking birth control is a chemical abortion. They think the IUD causes abortion. They have very much their own facts. And this is just another way for them to put more of their non-fact facts into the law.
Based on religious ideology, usually.
So it's like woman is incubator, and
Totally woman thing. Yes,
anything that goes wrong in the pregnancy is her fault.
Yeah, right.
So if they want to stand with moms, if they poll the moms of this country, they're standing on the wrong side of this issue, aren't they?
They are. They are. And, you do wonder sometimes what you said earlier, which is how do they think they are going to win when the majority of the country is not, they're not wild about abortion, but they're not in favor of banning it. And, we saw in the last election, there were 6 states that had the opportunity to pass anti-abortion laws and did not. And some of those states, like Kentucky and Kansas, are quite red.
So when we learned way back when the Supreme Court decided to accept the Dobbs ruling, you wrote something. You wrote, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, the future will be worse than the past. Now that more than 6 months have passed since that decision, do you stand by that prediction?
Oh, totally. Totally. When abortion was illegal before Roe, there was a lot of tacit acceptance of it. And there was a lot of not going after abortion providers. We hear about the cases where it happened, but in a lot of cases it didn't. And abortion practitioners practiced, I wouldn't say quite openly, but it was known. And now, for a variety of reasons, that won't be the case. The anti-choice movement is much more energized than it was when abortion was already illegal. And they have really put doctors on notice. And they have put women on notice, too. And I think that the fact that we now have all kinds of electronic methods of gathering information makes a difference, too. If you have a pregnancy a menstruation app on your phone, there's the possibility that information is being collected and will end up with some anti-choice person who will know when you have your period and when you don't have your period. It's a very scary thought.
Katha, I know you remember the days before Roe versus Wade, as do I, and I was 17 when it was handed down, and it was such a magnificent decision and a moment in time. What's your perspective, having lived through the era when it was illegal, then legal, and now we're right back at square one in terms of abortion as a federal right?
Well, I have to say, I was 24 when Roe came down, and I was not really tuned into this whole issue at that time, so I don't have, personal memories to report. But my mother had an illegal abortion, unbeknownst to me, and many of her friends did. I remember my mother gave $500 to various friends who needed abortions, and that was when $500 was, a lot more money than it is today. I think that abortion was very much a fact in the lives of ordinary women. And that's one thing that the anti-choice people try to obscure. But abortion was very much part of American life all along. And it still is, and it still will be.
So we are talking with Katha Pollitt about abortion rights. She's an abortion rights advocate, author, The Nation columnist. And when we return, Katha, we would like to ask you about 2 things. The religious war behind abortion rights and what you call the so-called pro-life movement and how it couldn't care less about the living.
We'll be right back with more Freethought Matters.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist.
When I first recorded that commercial back in 2014, being openly atheist in America was still fairly uncommon. Today, the fastest growing religious group in the country is the non-religious, especially among the young. That progress is heartening, but the religious pushback is fierce and the forces of Christian nationalism are well organized. Our progress won't continue unless we work together so that reason and our secular constitution will prevail. That's why I'm asking you to join the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics working to keep state and church separate, just like our founders intended. Please join the Freedom from Religion Foundation today. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
My name's Dustin, and I'm an out-of-the-closet atheist. I've only been an atheist for 3 or 4 years. I started being an atheist, I guess you could say, after a long period of existential angst that I felt in college. I don't know if I actually felt it. It could have just been more that I thought the brooding made me sexy and interesting, but I don't think that's actually the case. No, I'm actually an atheist because I've never actually heard a good argument for God, for his existence, or any God's existence. If I were to say there are unicorns in the world, you would go, okay, furnish the proof. So I put the same challenge out to theists out there, furnish the proof. I'm open, but I just haven't heard anything good yet.
So welcome back to Freethought Matters. We're continuing our conversation with our favorite columnist, Katha Pollitt of The Nation. So Katha, you were talking about what abortion rights were like before Roe and after, and you wanted to add something else about the patchwork nature of this whole process?
Yeah, when abortion was illegal, there were still states toward the end where abortion was legal, New York State, Hawaii, and there were states where it was semi-legal. And then Roe made it legal throughout the country. And I think we're returning to that patchwork state nature where if you can get to a pro-choice state, you can have an abortion. And if you can't, you're stuck. Now, an interesting thing is that some of the red states are trying to pass laws that you can't leave to have an abortion, which is completely contrary to your constitutional right to travel freely. I mean, everybody can leave Texas except pregnant women. It would be.
Right. It's like the Fugitive Slave Act all over again.
It really, and you know, with the Supreme Court being the way it is now, you can't automatically say, "Oh, that will never happen." We don't know what's going to happen. I do want to say, though, that some of the blue states are increasing their support for abortion rights. Most recently, Minnesota passed a law that protects all reproductive rights from local bans. You know, in some states, localities are trying to pass anti-abortion or anti-whatever bans, and this will make that not legal in the state of Minnesota. So that's really great.
So Katha, you and we have been talking for decades about how this so-called pro-life, anti-abortion movement is really a religious crusade, and yet it seems like people don't want to talk about that. Even a lot of liberals don't want to admit that this is a religious war that's going on. What do you think about that?
Not every anti-abortion person is an evangelical Protestant or a conservative Catholic, but the energy and the money to make an organized political movement at the grassroots level definitely comes from those places. That's where, you know, if you're in a town and you go to church, you go to one of those churches, and being anti-abortion is part of it. And I think that if you added up all the non-religious people that are against abortion, it would not be enough to make an impression on politics.
Well, 90% of atheists support Roe versus Wade, and 98% of the members of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, almost 99%, strongly support Roe.
Who are those other 2%?
Yeah, well, maybe they misunderstood.
Have them on the show.
But isn't this also a question of legislating dogma, this religious concept of when life begins?
Well, yeah, and it's not every religion either. For example, Judaism says you become a human being with rights when you take your first breath. And that doesn't mean that every Jewish person says, yeah, oh yeah, you can have one of those day before birth abortions that people talk about that never happen. But it does mean that there's always room for health and other considerations. And, there are very, very conservative Jewish rabbis that will say, no, in this circumstance, you should be able to have an abortion. In that circumstance, yes. And organized Judaism is very pro-choice.
So we do see kind of the Christian nationalist movement using the issue of abortion or behind the issue of abortion.
All these causes are coming together. That's the very interesting thing, that Christian nationalism, as you call it, that it's anti-abortion, it's very suspicious of public education and universities, taking books out of the school library, all that kind of stuff, anti-gay, anti-trans. It's all part of the same mentality. And it's a very siloed thing. So that is a very disturbing fact about politics in our time.
Yeah, scary. Now, you did a column, I think after the Dobbs decision, in which you said very forthrightly, the pro-life movement couldn't care less about the living. And so you muster a lot of facts and arguments about that. Can you share some of that?
The pro-life movement or the anti-choice movement, we mustn't call it pro-life.
Exactly.
The anti-choice movement often talks in the joke is your life begins at conception and ends at birth. They're concerned with it. And, I think that now they're talking about, now we have to help mothers and children. But at the same time, they're allied firmly with the Republican Party, which is totally against doing the things that would help mothers and children. So you have in one state, Indiana, I think it is, they're talking about cutting food stamps so that you can't have white rice, you can't have all kinds of perfectly normal foods. They're just trying to make life hellish for poor people. And I think as long as the anti-choice movement is allied with those politics, it's all going to be about, well, we'll do a little charity here, we'll do a little charity there. And it's always about helping the mother and the baby. It's never about helping the mother and the 10-year-old, but, kids aren't babies for very long. And the older they get, the more expensive they are. So I think that I will believe their commitment to helping mothers and children when I see them fighting for things that really help women and children.
So just to change the subject slightly, Katha, I know we've talked about overpopulation with you in the past, and you're really one of the very few columnists out there calling attention to overpopulation and the role it's playing in climate change and just generally making all problems worse. So we've hit 7.8 million and growing. I am curious, billion. And I'm curious what your reaction is to all this recent reporting about China's declining population as if it's a catastrophe.
I don't think it is a catastrophe. I think it requires some economic reworking. I mean, if you have a system where people rely on their children to support them in their old age, and suddenly there are fewer children and those children are in the workforce, et cetera, then you have to think of another way to do it. But I think basically people should have the number of children they want to have. And what you see in countries where the birth rate is falling is often, let's bludgeon and badger women into having children. Let's make them get married. This never works. And it's never sort of like, well, what do women need to have the children they want to have? Because there are people who want to have more children than they can afford, or they can support well. And you'd think governments would be saying, well, how can we make things easier? How can we make things easier for parents? One thing that just happened in China, I heard on the radio, is that they're now saying that single mothers can get various government benefits from which they were barred before. So, I mean, that's something, that's nice.
But in all of this, aren't women and their uteruses sort of being treated like a commodity? I mean, first China bans more than one child. Now it wants women to have 3.
Yeah, I know. No, it completely is. And, you know, in South Korea, which has one of the lowest birth rates, if not the lowest birth rate in the world, it's way less than replacement. It's a very, very sexist society where an overt anti-feminist just won the leadership and is abolishing all kinds of government things that were there to help women. So that's not going to work. And you have feminists there women there who subscribe to the 4 no's. Get this: no dating, no marriage, no children, and there's one other. I don't know what it is. There are a lot of them. Everything is no, no, no. And you think how desperate women must be to have some measure of self-control, and how angry they are that they will say, you know, we're not even going to date. You know, forget it, man. We're through with you.
Well, isn't it true that if there's a government that can tell women you can't have an abortion, that same government can tell them you can't have children? I mean, it can flip.
You mean that you must have children?
Yes. No, or that it can ban you from having children.
It can do either, and we saw that in China. Yeah. As you said, first it's you can only have 1 child, and then now it's we really want you to have 3. So.
Well, thank you, Katha Pollitt, for your thoughts on abortion rights and on population and on making this world, not some supernatural world, a better place.
And any final words of encouragement?
Well, I just want to say, I think, you know, Freedom from Religion Foundation does such a great job. And I think we all need to keep our eye on the ball here. I mean, there's so many issues that come up, and it's easy to become distracted. And it's also easy to become discouraged. So I think we have to think about when we win, which we have done some of, and try to make that happen more often. More Minnesotas.
Yes.
More New Yorks.
More New Yorks, yes. Well,
yes.
Thank you, Katha Pollitt, for being there and for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching Freethought Matters.
Because free thought matters.
Hi, I'm Steve Pinker. In my book, Enlightenment Now, I show that the world has become a better place as reason has been overcoming superstition and tribalism. But the values of the Enlightenment are under attack. That's why I'm a proud member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of free thinkers working to keep state and church separate. Please join me in supporting the Freedom from Religion Foundation to ensure that our government is driven not by religion, but by reason.